I'm Edie Lush, and I'm here at the Hub Culture Pavilion in Austin, and we're focusing on water today. Joe Vesey, thanks very much for coming along. Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer at Xylem. Now, you've got some interesting thoughts on water infrastructure. Tell me first what Xylem does.
So Xylem is a water technology company. We move water, we treat water, we test water, we meter water, and we do it all over the world.
Okay, so I'm from California. I lived through the drought in the 70s when my dad charted on a graph, this is before the days of Excel, our water usage and what we were taking outside from the shower to put onto the plants. That was it in terms of our water. There's been a recent drought in California. Tell me what that's done to consumer behavior.
Yeah, it's really interesting in terms of California. So California was in a 5-year drought. They just came out of it about a year ago. Mm-hmm. During the drought, the governor really put on a lot of restrictions for using water, and there was different targets to change your water usage, and that was pretty much done from 2013 levels as the baseline. Mm-hmm. And some towns saved up to 20% from that baseline. Mm-hmm. But what we see now that the drought is over, this top of mind seems to have gone away, and many areas now of California have reverted back to the levels of 2013, essentially giving back all of the behaviors that they were using to solve or use less water. That's all gone back. And so it's just a reminder, we all need to sustain this focus on water because the next crisis will come, and that behavior change is just going to have to happen that much faster in the future.
Tell me about Cape Town. I want to come back to what, in terms of solutions, what you recommend. But tell me about the situation in Cape Town, which is probably the most sort of prescient in terms of time.
Yeah, Cape Town is in a really tough spot right now. So they've been in a 3-year drought. They really have one primary source of water coming from rain that really draws up their aquifers and their different surface bodies of water. Now that the drought has happened, all that has dried up. Once they hit 13% on their reservoirs, essentially they will shut off the taps.
Right.
That's expected to happen in mid-July. It's been pushed back a little bit, but mid-July is when that's expected to happen. And that's going to be then a really tough situation. You have millions of people in that town who will now have to go to a local area to receive their water. And that's going to be quite a disruption, not only for everyone living there, but also for all the businesses that are there. I mean, water impacts all of our lives, right? And so businesses that require water to run their business will be impacted. So it's really a tough situation. One of the things they can do is diversify their water sources and find new sources of water, specifically recycling water that they're using within the town already is one area that they should look at, and other cities around the world should look at. There's probably 50 other cities today that are exactly where Cape Town was 3 years ago.
Okay.
And so the question is, what can they do now and not wait until the day zero that Cape Town is now looking at in just a few months?
Tell me about desalination. It always occurs to me that Cape Town sits on the water. Is that a viable option?
It certainly is. So we really advocate for a portfolio approach for sources of water. We really think you need to have many different sources of water. Desalination is one where you take salt water, you run it through a membrane, a reverse osmosis membrane, and you receive clean water essentially on the other side of the membrane. And many towns, coastal towns, do use desalination or reverse osmosis. One of the challenges, and it's a common challenge in water, is energy intensity. Okay. It is incredibly energy intensive and therefore incredibly costly to do that. But in certain applications, it's a requirement, and some of the technology in the future needs to overcome the energy that's required to actually make desal work. Many countries around the world, though, certainly many in the Gulf state area, use desalination as a primary source of water.
Tell me also about, back to California, because of course it's all about California. Yeah. I'm interested in, so when I grew up, going to the Central Valley for Christmas, for Thanksgiving, those towns, Porterville, California, they turned the taps off. There wasn't any water. And part of the problem was the agricultural intense use of water, and in fact it drained the ground reserves, so much so that in parts actually the ground was starting to fall down because there was nothing holding it up. Agricultural intensity is only set to increase with our population as the population rises. Tell me what thoughts you have there.
Yeah, so typically where you see agriculture, 70% of the water in any one area where agriculture is a part of that area, 70% of the water is used for agriculture. And so it's an enormously water intense application, if you will. And you said it exactly right. In California, they were really, because they were in a drought, they were going deeper and deeper underground and really pumping those aquifers for more sources of water, which then created craters in the surface area. And so that's a challenge that that agriculture has. Certainly as the world becomes bigger and bigger, we have to feed the world, and so you're going to need more food and water to do that. One of the newer technologies is around drip irrigation. Drip irrigation as opposed to flood irrigation. A couple techniques in agriculture use much less water to achieve the same crop output that flood irrigation. So agriculture, as well as many other industries, really need to understand their impact on water in their local community. They need to understand essentially the supply chain that really represents, and they need to deploy technology to really change the risk profile of that supply chain, essentially in this case of water. So how can they really use technologies to get more output for a drop of input?
So that's what agricultural companies can do. What about consumers? What can consumers do?
Well, I think for consumers, it's really education and awareness. Most consumers or most folks in the United States, I'll use that as an example, they really, if you ask them, where does your water come from? They'll tell you the tap. It comes from the kitchen, it comes from the tap. That's where it comes from. And so we're just a bit ignorant around where our water comes from. And I think if we all educate ourselves on where this precious resource comes from, and we understand, where the supply is and how reliable that supply is, I think that can do a lot. As an example, there's a big need for additional infrastructure in the United States. I'll stay with this example. And you need capital to really fill that void. If you think about trust in water, and many industries, not just the water industry, but many industries have a trust challenge.
Absolutely.
But if the water industry can really advocate and explain and educate on the value of water that's being delivered, which is an incredible product that they're delivering, if they can do that, then some consumers might change their behavior and buy less bottled water or buy less substitutes that they're paying quite a bit more for, $1 per gallon.
Huge premium.
Huge.
With a plastic impact as well.
Exactly. And so if they can actually if they can build the trust and divert that money that's already going into bottled water and divert that into paying a little bit more for the great water services they're receiving, and then that money can be reinvested in critical infrastructure that's required, that's one approach that can happen to really solve this capital challenge that exists in the system.
Joe, thank you so much for stopping by my very warm spot in the sun next to the water here in Austin, and I'm Edie Lush. Thank you.